Some discoveries do not illuminate the past. They deepen its shadows, leaving us holding a handful of silence. In the sun-scorched dust of the ancient Tigris Valley, not far from the modern sprawl of Baghdad, archaeologists unearthed a chamber that defied all expectations. The year was early in the 20th century, a time when the buried cities of Mesopotamia were yielding their stone libraries and golden tombs to the patient spade. At the site of Seleucia-on-Tigris, a once great Hellenistic metropolis founded by one of Alexander's generals, the excavation team broke into a room that immediately stilled the air around them. There were no towering statues, no hordes of silver coins, no papyrus scrolls waiting to be deciphered by trembling hands, only thousands upon thousands of tiny clay lumps scattered across the floor. Each lump was no larger than a thumbprint, fired to a terracotta hardness by an ancient inferno that had consumed everything else in that sealed chamber. When they lifted the fragments and turned them toward the lantern light, they saw the unmistakable impressions of carved gemstones, faces of kings, mythical beasts, astral symbols, and intricate geometric seals. These were clay sealings, the ancient equivalent of a notary's wax stamp, once pressed onto wet clay to close a document and mark its authority. But the documents themselves, the delicate papyrus or cured leather, had vanished, reduced to whispering ash in a catastrophic blaze that had ironically preserved their clay wrappers forever. You are left with a paradox that still haunts the halls of scholarship. An archive of signatures with nothing signed, a library of locks for which all the doors have turned to smoke. Imagine standing in that excavated silence, the desert wind carrying the scent of ancient soot, and realizing that you are surrounded by thousands of ghostly imprints, each one the final trace of a message that once mattered deeply to someone. This is the mystery of the Baghdad clay seals, a riddle carved not in stone, but in the negative space of a lost world's last breath. Mainstream archaeology quickly recognized the find for what it represented: one of the largest caches of administrative bullae ever discovered from the Parthian period, that once sprawled between the Roman frontier and the Persian heartland. They expected to find temple records or palace inventories, the mundane bureaucracy of a silting river empire whose rulers warred with emperors and worshipped syncretic gods. Instead, the seals pointed towards something far stranger: a concentration of identities so dense, so varied, and so deliberately stored that it has resisted easy explanation for nearly a century. Let us move backwards through the smoke into the city of Seleucia itself, a cosmopolitan hub where Greek philosophers, Persian magi, Indian merchants, and Arabian traders once bartered beneath colonnaded streets. By the 2nd century before the Common Era, this metropolis was a rival to Rome in population, a crucible of languages and faiths, and the beating commercial heart of the Silk Road's western terminus. In such a city, the sealing of documents was a daily ritual. Deeds of sale, marriage contracts, diplomatic letters, debt records, all bound with string, folded, and stamped with the owner's unique engraved gemstone. But the sheer number of seals in that one room, numbering in the thousands, each from a different individual, suggested not a family archive, but a central repository of civic or financial memory. The fire that destroyed the building was no accident of a tipped oil lamp. It was a conflagration of such intense heat that it transformed the soft river clay into a permanent fired ceramic, locking the years of the city's life into a ghost library. What secrets did those vanished documents hold? Some researchers point to the nearby harbor and customs house, theorizing that this was a mercantile archive, sealing cargo manifests and trade agreements from across the known world. If that were true, then the impressions on these tiny clay discs are a map of ancient globalization. A lion from Bactria, a winged bull from Assyria, a portrait of a Hellenistic ruler, a Zoroastrian fire altar. You could trace the commerce of continents through a handful of dust if only the cargo lists had survived alongside their seals. Yet a competing hypothesis whispers from the margins of excavation reports. The room might have stored tax records, the economic lifeblood of the Parthian satrapy. In that view, each seal represents a taxpayer's sworn declaration, a binding promise to a distant king etched in the cold clay of bureaucratic necessity. Why, then, were they all gathered in one place? The arrangement of the seals, many still attached to the hardened remnants of string, suggests they were not scattered by chance, but had been systematically shelved or hung. One can almost see the wooden cabinets now, the orderly rows of hanging parchment bundles, each stamped with the identity of its sender, waiting for some royal auditor who never arrived. Where archaeology faltered, local legend and darker historical memory began to fill the silence, whispering of a city that repeatedly burned at the hands of invaders. The Parthian era was a time of imperial clashes. Seleucia changed hands between Roman legions and Parthian armies, each sacking leaving a stratum of ash beneath the rebuilding efforts. Perhaps the clay seals were never meant to survive as riddles. Perhaps the fire was an act of war, a deliberate incineration of the city's financial memory by a conquering general who wanted to erase the old debts. Imagine the roar of the flames, reflected in polished bronze helmets as scrolls curled into cinder, leaving behind only the hardened clay that even the fiercest fire could not unmake. There is another, more chilling, theory that arises from the very nature of a bullae itself. It was a security device, a tamper-proof seal guaranteeing that the message inside had not been read by unauthorized hands. If that is true, then the thousands of seals we now possess are the fingerprints of a secret society, crystallized in the moment of its destruction by a fire set intentionally to purge incriminating evidence. You can feel the weight of unknown intent pressing down through the centuries, the trembling of a hand that either set the blaze or frantically tried to save what was inside. Scientific analysis has tried to speak for the dead by studying the clay itself, the microscopic residues in the string impressions, and the neutron activation profiles of the terracotta. Such studies confirm that the fire exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius, a temperature consistent with a catastrophic architectural collapse, feeding oxygen into an inferno that would have been impossible to survive indoors. But the clay refuses to yield the scent of what it once contained. The papyrus is utterly gone, leaving the seal impressions as pure surface, depthless as a reflection in a dark mirror. This is the labyrinth of evidence. We hold the locks, but the keys have dissolved into the air of ancient Mesopotamia, leaving us surrounded by beautiful, useless authority. Now, step into the gallery of theories where desperate scholars have tried to piece meaning from these silent witnesses, their efforts sometimes bordering on obsession. The first and most rational school argues for an economic archive, a filing room for a significant financial institution, perhaps a temple treasury or the credit house of a wealthy merchant family. Under this light, the diversity of seals simply reflects the diverse clientele, from Jewish bankers to Palmyrene caravan masters, all doing business under the Parthian peace. But if this was routine commerce, why have we found so few duplicates? Why does each seal impression seem to represent a unique individual, echoing a one-time transaction rather than a recurring account holder? A second hypothesis shifts the ground beneath our feet. The seals might not be from internal bureaucracy at all, but from intercepted foreign correspondence, a kind of ancient intelligence archive. Picture Seleucia as a listening post, a tabularium of espionage, where the imprints of every letter passing through the empire's crossroads were carefully copied and stored before the original was sent onward. This would mean the seals are a catalog of identities to monitor. The dusty imprint of a Roman spy's signet ring, the code of a desert tribe's chieftain, all captured in clay by a paranoid administration. Where espionage tinges the air with suspicion, a third theory dives deeper into the sacred, proposing that the fire consumed a religious library of syncretic mystery cults. Seleucia was a birthplace of Gnostic thought, a place where the figure of the Baptist mingled with the cult of Mithras and the echoes of Babylonian star worship. Some of the impressions bear strange iconography: a serpent swallowing its tail, a seven-pointed star, a veiled goddess with no known name in the standard pantheons, hinting at a cosmology we have not yet deciphered. A fourth, and deeply unsettling, possibility emerges from the forensic arrangement of the find. The seals may not have sealed documents at all, but rather sealed physical objects, bags of grain, amphorae of wine, or even human remains. In this macabre interpretation, the clay bullae were death tags, attached to funerary offerings deposited in a charnel house that caught fire, sealing the identity of the giver alongside the ashes of the dead. The room, then, would be a house of the dead, its melted mass of clay and ash, a collective memorial for families whose names were burned away in the very act of preservation. Each theory seems to drag us further from certainty, as if the seals themselves are a cunning trap, a mirror reflecting our own modern hunger to catalog and control the past. The debate among historians and archaeologists over these sealings has become a quiet, scholarly war fought in footnotes and conference halls, with reputations staked on whether the room was a vault, a shrine, or a bonfire of the vanities. In the labyrinth of interpretation, you begin to sense that the real mystery is not what the seals contained, but why they were kept at all, why a society would hoard the empty shells of transactions long past. Perhaps the act of keeping the seals was itself a ritual, a form of ancient record-keeping so sacred that even the ghosts of documents had to be retained as proof of an orderly universe. This brings us to the threshold of the human element, where the cold clay begins to warm with the fingerprints of those who once walked these vanished boulevards. Consider the individual who pressed their signet ring into the soft clay. The slight tremor of a hand, the breath held for a moment, the solemnity of an identity distilled into a single, incised image. Each seal was a signature more intimate than ink, a direct transfer of a person's civic soul onto the document that would carry their obligations or their love across the miles. For many in the ancient world, the loss of one's signet ring was a catastrophe worse than losing a limb. It meant the dissolution of legal self, the risk of forgery, the potential theft of one's honor. Now imagine the frantic search that must have ensued after the fire. The survivors sifting through the still smoldering rubble, finding only these hardened clay lumps where their proofs of ownership, inheritance, and debt had been. They must have held these sealings in their soot-stained palms and wept, knowing that the fire had stolen not just the past, but the future, the ability to reclaim what was owed, to prove who they were. The archaeologists who uncovered the hoard in the 20th century felt a kindred despair. They too were confronted with the fragmentation of identity, the inability to fully resurrect a civilization from its administrative debris. The dig diaries from that excavation season whisper of sleepless nights, of local workmen spreading myths about a buried treasure that had lured the team, only to deliver a chamber of mute clay. You can track the psychological toll in the correspondence of the lead excavator, who oscillates between euphoria at the discovery's uniqueness and a deepening melancholy at the impossibility of its complete translation. He once wrote, "We have found the words of a lost city, but we have lost the language in which they were written. We are left spelling the alphabet of the dead." This obsession with the Baghdad clay seals has not dimmed with time. It has metastasized into a parable about the limits of historical science. Art historians have spent entire careers cataloging the iconography, redrawing each worn engraving under oblique light, seeking patterns in the positioning of griffins, lotus blossoms, and clasped hands. They have identified motifs linking the seals to specific workshops from the ancient Persian Gulf to stone cutters in Syria, and even to a master engraver who signed his tiny work with an invisible monogram. But knowing where a seal was carved tells us nothing about the document it sealed, any more than knowing the make of a key tells us what lies behind the locked door. There is a profound and frightening lesson here about the nature of archives. They are not neutral preservers of truth. They are fragile ecosystems that a single fire can transform into an indecipherable code. The Baghdad clay seals stand as a monument to the fire that birthed them, a warning that what survives the ages is often the accident of chemistry, not the intention of historians. We tell ourselves that time reveals all things, but as you look upon these tiny terracotta witnesses, you realize that time reveals only what cannot burn. In the quiet galleries of the Iraq Museum, where many of these ceilings were kept before the looting of 2003, they survived millennia only to face the chaos of a modern war. Some were stolen, some were broken, and a few were recovered in raids on black market antiquities dealers, their journey from ancient fire to modern conflict completing a tragic circle. The clay that had survived a Parthian conflagration now bore the scratches of shovels wielded by desperate looters, adding another layer of enigmatic destruction to their already mysterious biography. This cycle of violence around the seals reminds us that the mystery is not just ancient, it is ongoing, a living wound in the fabric of our shared heritage. Human obsession ends not in resolution, but in a kind of quiet awe, a respectful bow before a depth of time that swallows all certainties. If you could hold one of these clay seals in your hand, you would feel not answers, but a vertigo of possibility. The touch of a person who lived 2,000 years ago, sealing a message you will never read. That sensation, that electric bridge across the abyss of time, is the true gift and the true wound of the Baghdad seal mystery. As we now move into the final, lasting silence, we must confess that no forthcoming technology, no AI reconstruction, no quantum spectroscopy, will ever resurrect the words that turn to ash. The DNA of the plant fibers in the papyrus has long since broken apart. The ink, likely carbon-based, has merged with the general soot. The fingerprint ridges on the clay have worn into anonymity. Even if we could recover a pristine document sealed within one of the bullae, the act of breaking the seal to read it would destroy the evidence of its closure. A perfect and cruel paradox of conservation. The mystery endures not as a question to be answered, but as a state of being, a condition of watching a civilization forever closing its doors against our prying eyes. There is a certain comfort in believing that history is a solved puzzle, a great jigsaw where every piece will one day be found and fitted neatly into place. But the clay seals mock that comfort. They are the puzzle pieces that have no corresponding picture, the lock picks that rattle inside, a lock that no longer exists. These seals are the physical embodiment of that silence, solidified into a shape we can touch but never hear, see but never read. In the end, what fascinates us is not the missing documents, but the desire to complete a story, any story, that will make sense of the darkness that falls between us and the ancient world. The Baghdad clay seals hold up a mirror to our own need for meaning, our own fearful suspicion that the cosmos is fundamentally indifferent to record keeping. They remind us that every civilization, including our own, will one day be reduced to a layer of compacted debris where only the hardest, most meaningless objects survive the inferno of time. Our digital archives will not fare better. The servers will rust, and the magnetic charges will fade, leaving future archaeologists with polished silicon wafers and a silence deeper than the one we face today. The mystery of the Baghdad clay seals is not about what was kept. It is about what was lost, and the profound human ache to touch a voice that has been silent for 2,000 years. We will keep listening to the clay, and the clay will keep holding its breath, whispering only the faintest impression of a dream that once mattered enough to seal.